This week on Quadriga, head-to-head. Will Israel vote change? As Israelis prepare to go to the polls on March the 17th, the key battle is between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Labour leader Isaac Herzog. Likud chief Netanyahu has focused his campaign on security issues. Last week, he made a controversial speech to the US Congress, rejecting a deal on Iran's nuclear program. That emphasis could distract attention from domestic issues like housing and poverty and help Netanyahu form a coalition if he needs the support of smaller right-wing parties. Meanwhile, Herzog has formed a centre-left alliance, the Zionist Union, with former Foreign Minister Malte Lehming. They're campaigning for reconciliation with the Palestinians and an end to Israel's international isolation. Meir Dagan, a former head of Israel's foreign intelligence service Mossad, has also entered the fray. He says Israel is facing the most serious leadership crisis in its history. The vote will be close. Will Israelis stick with their tough-talking prime minister? Or will they choose new leaders in hopes of transforming Israel and the region? Your host this week, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you, of course, from the German capital, Berlin. And today we're going to be looking at the Israeli parliamentary election, which is just a couple of days away. It's taking place next Tuesday, to be precise. We're going to be addressing the question, are the Israeli people going to vote for change? Does Israel need to change? And if the answer to that question is yes, then in what direction? Big questions indeed. To discuss these issues, I've got three excellent panellists, three excellent observers of all things Israel with me here in the studio today. Let me introduce them to you, beginning with Malte Lehming, who is the editor of the opinion page of the very well-respected Berlin-based daily Tagesspiegel. In the past, he has also specialised in security issues, transatlantic relations and the Middle East. Also with us today, Rafael Seligmann. He is a German-Israeli writer, analyst, political scientist and historian who is the publisher and editor-in-chief of the English-language newspaper The Atlantic Times, which is well worth reading. And last but not least, as they say, our old friend Judy Dempsey, currently a writer and analyst for the Carnegie Foundation. She has down the years worked for a whole host of media outlets in a long and distinguished career. Welcome, Judy. Welcome to all of you. Malte Lehming, I'd like to begin with you. Israel, as I have already mentioned, goes to the polls on Tuesday. Israel is a small country, truth be told. Only 8 million people live in the country. Fewer than 6 million, as far as I know, are eligible to go and vote. What makes this election so important for the country itself and internationally?
As always, this election is the most important election, as we were told, and as always, it will turn out it will not be. So that's part of the game and part of Israeli election, that you always, the expectations are so high, and everybody thinks now it's a neck-to-neck election, Herzog against Bibi Netanyahu, and who will win and will it change and matter and so on. As we've heard, there is a figure, Bibi Netanyahu, who is quite a strong, charismatic figure. We all know him. We have seen him in front of the Congress, applauded by mostly Republican senators and congressmen about his strong anti-Iran agreement speech. And we have Isaac Herzog, which a couple of weeks ago, I think nobody outside Israel really got to know. And who,
not in Israel.
Even though he comes from a very political family, chief rabbi, his grandpa, his father was president, and his uncle Abba Eban was quite a foreign minister and a good writer and things like that. But he is not as charismatic as Benjamin Netanyahu. So it will turn out, if it will be the crucial election that many people say it is now. I'm a little bit skeptical about that.
An excellent introduction to our topic there, Malte. Do you share that assessment, Judy, or do you have a different sort of narrative?
Well, it should be a hugely important election because of where Israel is located. It is extraordinarily, nearly, if I can use the religious word, miraculous, that there hasn't been the spillover from Syria. The situation in Egypt is just so fragile. On the Sinai, we have seen what's happening there. Lebanon, there's practically implosion happening. It is extraordinary that until now, Israel has remained stable. And in that sense, Israeli should seize the moment. And that moment actually should seize the issue of trying to make peace once and for all with the Palestinians. The Americans are so tired of the entire issue, and indeed so are the Europeans. But that's not the point. The Israelis should seize the opportunity. I'm not saying they will.
It's interesting what you're saying. I mean, a very influential German newspaper, one that we all read every morning, the Süddeutsche Zeitung from Bavaria, from Munich, they came out this morning and they said, reflecting what you're saying, they said there is a yearning for calm and normality after the long years of Netanyahu's alarmism. That seems to be very much in line with what you're saying there.
Yes. What is fascinating about Netanyahu, if anybody can describe him as a fascinating character, is that he doesn't mention the P word, the Palestinian word. And when he went to Congress, he didn't mention Palestine once. But this Iran, of course, is a big issue, but the existential issue of Israel's existence, of its stability, of its place in the Middle East is anchored. It's part and parcel of getting a final peace settlement with its neighbours.
It's interesting, isn't it? There are two P words in this election that haven't been mentioned. One is peace. One is the Palestinians.
Indeed, and both are tied to each other.
And they're both right at the core of what we're talking about here. What is central to people's lives in Israel? But they haven't been necessarily at the core. They've been elephants in the room. In the Israeli election so far. As a Rafael Seligmann, it's interesting what Judy is saying, that she's talking about all the huge challenges and threats in Israel's neighbourhood, in the broader region. Nevertheless, many people are describing this election as essentially a referendum on Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you see it that way?
No. I think there are two questions. First of all the Israeli want peace with the Palestinians, maybe 80%. The problem is with whom? If you would have elections comparable to election in Germany or in Israel, 70% of the Palestinians would vote in favor of Hamas. And Hamas is against the existence of Israel, independent of any borders. They are against the existence of a Jewish state, point. So Abbas is more or less invention of the European democracies and America. He has no real power. That's one point. The second point, I have 3 points.
Go on.
Is Netanyahu didn't mention Palestine in the Senate, but some years ago, even he mentioned it and said we would like to live in peace with a Palestinian entity, with a Palestinian state. 6 years ago in the Bar Ilan speech. But the real, in my opinion, the real questions for the Israeli and for the applause for Netanyahu in Israel, and I brought a piece with me from David Grossman, who is in the peace camp. The Israelis agree, and he writes it, on the real threat. It's not the Palestinian. It's important, I agree. We have to make peace with the Palestinians. The question is with whom, with which power? The real challenge is Iran. And for me, it's a real scandal. It's that 70 years after World War II, after the Holocaust, one member of the United Nations, Iran, says openly, we want to destroy another state, Israel. And That's a real challenge, not the technical issue of how you can control.
Okay, so, but the question is, sorry to interrupt, but the question then is, it seems to me, if there's a problem with the Palestinians, the issue of how to move forward with the Palestinians is one problem. The other major problem that Israel faces, apart from Islamic State, is Iran.
Of course, Iran.
You need progress on that. Does that mean that Israel, to address these three major problems, does Israel need a new government? Does Israel need change in politics? And is there a credible opposition that can deliver that opposition?
May I answer very short?
Go on, a short answer on that one. First of all,
yes,
then we can...
Israel needs a unity government, not this fraction of 10 parties with 10 interests and all the stuff we know. Israel needs a unity government influenced by EU and the United States.
Okay, so left, right and centre essentially working together. Malte?
Left, right and centre, we had a unity government and we still had no progress with the talks in the Palestinians. So what I would like to add, or even to argue against what you've said just, is there is a real threat from Iran. I think nobody who is in his mind will doubt that. The atomic program is a real threat, and the whole international community, all the members of the Security Council, including Germany, are now negotiating about that, and I think they're taking this seriously. The rhetoric of Netanyahu goes to an either-or rhetoric. It's unless you haven't solved the Iranian problem, we can't deal with the Palestinian problem. And this is utterly nonsense. You can do both at the same time. To say the bigger threat is Iran, therefore we cannot care about the Palestinian problem, is just, that's his rhetoric. Second point, his next rhetoric is, and if we deal with it, look what happened in Gaza and South Lebanon. If we pull out, they become extremists, we can't deal with them. So he's using Iran and Gaza not to talk about the real issue, it's a Palestinian issue. But there is no figure, and I doubt Isaac Herzog will be such a figure like, for example, Charles de Gaulle. What was the good thing about Charles de Gaulle? He liberated his own people from the burden of being an oppressor. And there is no one right now in Israel that sees the necessity, as Rabin, for example, did, Yitzhak Rabin, to liberate his own people from being an oppressor. When the next Prime Minister of Israel will have 50 years of the '67 war. We have 50 years, 5 decades of oppression and occupation. And there is no one to see the need to liberate his own people, because that's a burden for his own people. We're not talking about the Palestinians, his own people. It's corrupting a people to be an oppressor. But I doubt that anyone right now in the political sphere in Israel sees the necessity to do it.
It's unbelievably complicated because there's no yes or no. Briefly about Iran, I personally think the Palestinian issue should have been tackled a long, long time ago to stop other Arab countries that really don't like Israel to take. They always use the Palestinian issue as an alibi for being anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist. But if you get that off the table, it's anybody's guess. Then you would take part of that agenda off the Iranian issue, perhaps. That's the first thing. Secondly, Malte, the most tragic thing about Israel since 1967 is how the occupation has dented the moral character of the country. And now the fact that they don't mention the Palestinian word and the Gaza, people don't. The majority just don't want to know about it, and those that do want to speak about it, they won't get the majority they need to bring this peace. But finally, what is happening is the radicalization of the Palestinian side, especially the young people, and by the way, they're not all pro-Hamas, and the exhaustion of the Israeli society that they don't know where to turn to anymore. And I think this is the tragedy of this election.
And the next tragedy is, I mean, there was a logic behind Oslo, Oslo in the beginning of the 90s, 91. It is you make peace not with your friends but with your enemies. When the PLO was sitting in Oslo at the table with the Israeli side, it was a terror organization. It was forbidden to have contact with the PLO. It was supposed to destroy the state of Israel. Nevertheless, they talked with the PLO because the logic was you make peace with your enemies and not with your friends. Now, if you look to Hamas, nobody likes Hamas. Nobody. How can you like Hamas? It's a brutal regime and the Islamist terrorist organization. We all agree on this. But whom do you make peace with? Your friends or your enemies?
In a more immediate sense, let's just move away from these big geostrategical questions just for a second, because one of the questions we've been asked to address today is, does Israel need to change? Does Israel want to change? Is Israel going to change? Each of you give me one suggestion for how Israel perhaps ought to change. Judy.
Change the election system. 3%, the threshold to get into the parliament. And it's what Rafael was saying. 10 parties, unity government, forget it. Anybody can get 3% and they're in, and it makes coalition governments or politics different.
And the net result of that is that Israeli politics is fragmented.
Completely.
Big problem.
It used to be much lower. Then we had 19 parties in government, now we have 10 or 11. So it is a progress, but it's still not enough.
This fragmentation leads to the problem that immediately after the election, what happens next is perhaps the most important chapter in an Israeli election, the coalition building, which is a polite word for horse trading.
The tragedy that I'm seeing is there's a certain development in between the Israeli society, and it becomes more religious, more Sephardic than Ashkenazim Jews, and so on and so on. Not with the Russians. I take the Russians out, but in general.
If you take it.
But the Russians are a factor in itself. So they have their own kind of voting systems and so on. But the problem is the situation in the whole Middle East, with Iran, with Syria, all the states you mentioned, Egypt, the ISIS. It's so terrible that the feeling is, let's not change our stability. So that will speak in favor of Bibi Netanyahu. Let's not change too much of stability. Let's not risk now pulling out of the West Bank and risk war with the settlers. No, nobody will do that. No, we don't need a civil war in our country when there is so much war around the country.
Surely
that will strengthen
many Israelis,
the Netanyahu side.
Stagnation and isolation. Big problems.
Stagnation and isolation. Well, the rest of the world, Europe, America, you mentioned that. What's development in Obama is America in a way. He was chosen by African Americans, Asians, Latinos, which will be the majority, and which like they have their own feeling like having been second-class citizens. So their solidarity with the Palestinians, it's much stronger even than what we've seen in Congress with these white evangelical Republican Christians. They're becoming minority. So he's risking a alienation from the United States as well.
Okay.
So that is the tragic.
Rafael, what about the economy?
The economy is more or less okay, but I think more or less.
That's not what many people say. Many people say there's not enough housing, that wages are too low, that they're not earning a living wage.
Okay, that you have the same challenge in Europe, you have it in America. The gap is in Israel widening, but it's less than in the United States. But I think what you proposed is right. We have to make it simultaneously, trying to make peace with the Palestinians, of course. By the way, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Voice from Germany. The Atlantic Times is formed. But no, we have to make it simultaneously, to try to make peace with the Palestinians. It's very difficult, you know it, with whom, but we have to try it on the one hand. On the other hand, what I can't understand is that's a tactical question for me. The strategic danger, not only for Israel, for Egypt, for Saudi Arabia, even for Turkey, is a nuclear threat. Not to throw the bomb, but to help terror organizations like the Hamas, like the Hezbollah, like interruption in the civil war in Syria. So we have to make it simultaneously. But the small Israeli voter asks himself, what can I do? What can we do? And we can arrive only peace together with the community, with the international democratic community, not with Mr. Putin, who is trying to sell his arms. The Americans are selling it to Saudi Arabia, but together. And it's very, the Israelis tried it even left parties that tried it in Camp David had an agreement, and who destroyed in the last minute, it was Mubarak.
Well, let's wait we come in here. Now, there's this. It wasn't proved if it was a myth or not that only a Likud government can make peace with the Palestinians.
That's nonsense.
I know, and we saw what Sharon tried to do. I mean, he did go the furthest, perhaps, of them all. But what is happening as we speak are more facts on the ground. And the more facts on the ground, the more the settlers expand into the West Bank, even more, the more difficult it will be to actually have a kind of peace agreement. And the big question is, does Netanyahu really want peace?
Everyone in Israel wants peace. The question is, which are the conditions? On what conditions?
I'm going to break you up here because I want to move on to one thing, because we've talked a lot about Benjamin Netanyahu as being thus far the central figure in the last 6 years. In fact, he's been in office for 9 years in total. Let's have a quick look at a report now about Isaac Herzog, about the challenger, because he is one person. He's promising that he can adopt a different tone in the dialogue with the Palestinians and in the whole region. Let's have a look at the report first of all before we talk about that.
For many, Isaac Herzog is the face of political change in Israel. The 54-year-old lawyer has led a spirited campaign for his Zionist Union alliance. We have a historic chance for change. Help me convince everyone. Do you really want 4 more years with Netanyahu? 4 more years of this craziness? We will win these elections. Polls indicate the centre-left alliance is neck and neck with the ruling Likud party. Herzog is promising to lower living costs and reopen talks with the Palestinians. Known by his nickname Bougie, his supporters say he's a real alternative to Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. Firstly, he's not Bibi. Secondly, he's the only one who can beat Bibi. Thirdly, I like the party programme, and it could finally bring about change for the better. In person, he seems like a real leader. Sadly, it doesn't really come across on TV or radio. But this here is the real Herzog. But while those campaigning on Herzog's behalf want him to have the chance to form a new government, they also know it could prove difficult to build a stable coalition.
You've met Isaac Herzog, yeah?
I
Tell us about it. We need to get to know him a little bit better. He's come out of nowhere for most of us, we agreed earlier.
I mean, listen, he's no dove, and Israelis never elect a dove. So we must get this straight. Secondly, the Labour Party isn't a dovish party either. It's maybe left-wing on certain issues, but, I mean, if they are going to restart the peace process with the Palestinians, they're not going to...
word process. There's no
exactly.
process,
If they're going to restart any kind of peace negotiations, Herzog, a very nice... plain-speaking man, quite charismatic in his own way.
Soft-spoken, consensual, compromise.
He's a toughie. He's a toughie. Oh, yes.
He doesn't talk tough.
Well, you have to be tough if you want to survive Israeli politics.
That's true. That's true.
Israeli politics in all countries.
You're
saying it. I mean, I've diligently written down many quotes from Isaac Herzog. I mean, security is not only in the barrel of a gun. He sounds like a real sort of old-school lefty when he says that kind of stuff.
Look, he has a constituency, and remember his constituency, the very name of his party reveals a particular constituency, left-wingers, but his very constituency...
You're talking about the Labour Party?
Yeah, the revamped Labour Party with Tzipi Livni. I mean, they do want to try to kickstart some kind of peace dialogue, but Herzog is working on 2 tracks. He's not going to win on wanting peace with the Palestinians. He could win, depends on the coalition the day after, he could win on the promise of actually making Israel prosperous again and giving the citizens a stake in the country. Many have fallen down by the wayside. And Rafael, I'm not entirely... I should agree with you that Israel has 2% growth. I mean, compared to Europe, it's golden, it's heaven. But, I mean, the poverty is going down, the Sephardim are poor, the ultra-Orthodox are getting stronger, and Israel as a country, as its identity, is absolutely in question in terms of how it's going to sustain its democracy, how religious it's going to become, and the demographic time bomb of their neighbours. It's facing all these issues, and Herzog, can he deliver?
What in concrete terms is he proposing on the economy?
He's over the next couple of years, he's proposing 1.3 billion spending plan
a lot of
for
money
education,
for Israel.
housing, absolutely, for the infrastructure. The successive Israeli governments have spent enough on the subsidised housing in the West Bank for the settlements. I would be interested to see if he will reduce the subsidies of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think as well. I don't think that any party right now is going into the election with the "we make peace with the Palestinians." That's a non-seller in Israeli politics right now.
I don't agree.
So,
I don't agree.
Herzog,
we'll give Rafael a chance, but let's focus on that statement that you just made. No, Malte, I am willing to ignite a process, says Isaac Herzog. A peace process he's talking about, and he's saying he's talking about kickstarting new dialogue with the Palestinians. He's also talking about the rehabilitation of Gaza, a kind of mini Marshall Plan.
Yes, it's a lot of things, but it's not his number one priority, which he's going into his election. If you listen to his election and to his followers, he's not Bibi. He could be the next leader. I like his program. His followers are not talking about he will be the one who brings us peace with Palestinians. This is number 6, 7, 8. Yes, he says so. But his followers, the reason to vote for him is not because people believe we can make peace right now. You have three possible outcomes. Either Herzog is strong enough to form a coalition, center-left, which I doubt he will, but it's still possible. Mm-hmm. Then
more centre-centre, truth be told.
Centre-left coalition government with Moshe Carlon, or I don't know how he would be able to do that. But it will be, he would have a mandate, a very, very weak, like 61, 62, 63 seats in the Knesset out of 120. He will have a strong opposition against him. To dismantle just one settlement would be a killer for him. Or we have a Netanyahu government, and we will have no peace at all, or a unity government and a blockade if it comes to peace with the Palestinians.
Let's give Rafael a chance.
You're always looking for another Jew, Jesus Christ. It's true. Herzog is not Jesus Christ. I don't see any other person in the world politics, but he tries to make peace. And we should take it serious. And look, if you look the jury in Europe, you described it. It's true. It's all the problems in Israel. But it's interesting that today you hear in Israel, France, speaking French. Why? Because the people in Europe, in this safe Europe, where the war in Ukraine is starting and will continue, don't feel secure enough. So I think there is a chance in Israel to make peace, to believe Herzog, but he will need a broad coalition.
Surely one of the points with Isaac Herzog, we've referred to it a little bit, is this fact that he is, by Israeli standards, he effectively comes from a blue-blooded family, an aristocratic family, that a lot of people are looking at Isaac Herzog, and he, because of that background, there's a sort of a promise of a return to the good old days, of former stability.
I think it's something else. Herzog knows Europe very, very well. Mm-hmm. And Herzog understands what has happened to Israel over the past couple of years. It's going through a very nasty phase of isolation, of being shunned. It's bad for the Jews in Europe, and it's bad for the Israelis, and it's bad for the Palestinians. You cannot, and for Herzog's first task, by making peace with the Palestinians, at least on the agenda, he's trying to give the signal to Europe, listen, stop all this stuff anti-Israel on the university campuses. Stop banning these plays when Israeli theatre groups go to Europe. Take me seriously, give me a chance, help me do this dialogue. And I think in some ways it's a plea for him. Give me a chance. And he's appealing to us in Europe, and indeed to his young people also. They need a stake in the Israeli society.
And maybe tell one thing. You said it would be so difficult to destroy one settlement. Israel retreats 2 times from Sinai, destroys the settlements. It retreats in the time of Ariel Sharon, who was described as a fascist. It makes peace with Menachem Begin, who even Ben-Gurion from the socialist calls a fascist. I don't speak with. So there is a drive for peace in the most Israeli parties. And that's the reason why I think a stable, great coalition, left, right, have the best chances to make peace with the Palestinians. And it's true, the occupation destroys the mind of Israel, the climate of Israel. We need to make peace with the Palestinians with the highest cost possible, with complete retreat, but we may have to do it. And on the other hand, I ask the world to believe Israel. If they want to make peace, and they showed it in the history, give peace a chance also to Israel.
Okay. Yes, I mean, there were. You're completely right. But if we talk about a settlement in Sinai Yamit, even in Sinai, where you have no emotional connection to, you needed to fight for weeks about a small settlement to get rid of.
It was
at the end in Gaza, where you have no emotional connection to Gaza. Now we're talking about the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. There is a strong emotional connection to Judea and Samaria, much stronger than Gaza and Egypt and Sinai. We cannot compete with that. So, and we had a leader, Yitzhak Rabin, who was much stronger than Isaac Herzog is now.
Even French territory. And
I know, but we had a leader, Yitzhak Rabin, who was a much stronger figure than Isaac Herzog is now in terms of he was ready to break the bones of the Palestinians.
One second. I can see the clock ticking down. I want to move on to one other aspect, because we keep coming back to the peace process, the lack of a peace process, hopes for a peace process. It's fascinating. But I just want to talk about the election. Next Tuesday's election, I want to talk about one sector of the Israeli public who are going to be voting in this election. They are the 20% of Israeli voters the Arab Israelis, yeah? We've got this report before we talk about what impact they could have on the outcome of this important vote.
For the first time, 4 Israeli Arab parties have united to fight an election under one banner, the Joint Arab List. Polls suggest the bloc could finish in 3rd place. If Arab citizens go out and vote for the joint list and it gets 15 seats or more, it will be a historic step because it may help Arabs to gain influence. Israel's Arab minority has long complained of poor treatment by the state. They say they receive worse education, healthcare and housing than Jewish Israelis. The main reason I'm going to vote this time is because of the joint list. I'm not raising my expectations about things they cannot achieve. But just because they are united, they deserve our vote. The leader of the Arab bloc, Ayman Odeh, has not said whether he would seek to join a coalition or remain in opposition. Whatever happens, the Arab voice within the Knesset is likely to be louder than before.
That's an interesting development, isn't it? I know you wanted to go somewhere else, but this is important. A louder voice than ever before for the Arab community in Israel. A lot of people outside Israel, when they hear that, they must find that encouraging as a development, I think, in a lot of ways, because the Arab Israelis themselves have often talked about how they feel as though they're treated like an enemy within Israel. This is a new development. They're getting a stronger voice. They could be the 3rd largest party.
Well, I hope this united list really does hold. And, I mean, what is interesting is the mobilization, that they haven't retreated, they haven't given up. And, you know, a lot of the Israeli Arabs have been treated badly, especially in the public sector. But this is the chance, when it comes to Herzog, that he could have a possible alliance here. That's the first thing. Secondly, the Israeli Arabs, generally speaking, they do want a stable peace with the Palestinians. I mean, they really want this. They don't want to be part of Palestine, but they want. They are actually are much more comfortable living in Israel. They don't want to live under the Palestinian Authority. And forget about Hamas. That's completely out of the question. But here's a chance. Here's something new, and you know what? This could undemonize the Israeli Arabs who have depends on who you talk to in Israel, a certain contempt, or they don't figure there. Let's hope this is the turning point.
You were nodding vigorously.
I completely agree. I think it's a very, very good sign, and I hope that many more Israeli Arabs will turn out in the election. So they are around 50, 53, 56% in general, because many of them think the moment I vote, I say yes to the whole system or Zionist creature or whatever they call them. So by voting and saying yes to the system, it's a very, very good sign of participating in Israeli society. Mm-hmm. What the disadvantage could be, or what the next step could be in any peace agreement, is the talks of the Jewish majority. That we've seen that before, that if there's a real peace agreement with the Palestinians, you need a Jewish majority. That is what it's called. We cannot rely on the Israeli Arabs. So this discussion will, for sure, come up again.
Mm-hmm. What's your position, Rafael, on the Arab Israelis and the influence they could have on the outcome when it comes to the coalition building?
I think the only Arabs in the Middle East who are living in a democratic system, and they know it, and they prefer it, as you mentioned, and it's a chance. Not only in the Middle East. If we are negotiating on Ukraine, on Greece, we always try to be positive, to see the advantage, and it will take time, but I think there is a chance. There's no security, but it's not safety, but there is a chance for peace. And I think we should try it.
It's a very optimistic message. Judy, you were...
Can I just go back to the Israeli-Arab issue, Rafael? I think it's very important for Israeli democracy.
Of course.
That Israel doesn't go along this Netanyahu line, Israel for the Jews. I mean, Israel is must be an inclusive democratic country.
But then what do you make of these very recent comments, for example, from Avigdor Lieberman, the foreign minister, the ultra-nationalist, coming out and saying that if they're on our side, talking about the Arab Israelis, all well and good. If they're not on our side, the language he used was shocking.
It's a bit like Janusz
Chop off their heads with
an axe. It's a bit like 1956 in Hungary. He was not against us. He is not with us, is against us. Look. Avi Lieberman is actually being charged with corruption charges. May those charges continue for some time.
We've talked about leadership. We've talked about Benjamin Netanyahu. I've mentioned the fact that he has in total been in office for 9 years. You know, we don't know about Isaac Herzog yet, what sort of capacities, what potential he promises. In the last couple of days, while I've been talking to the people around me, looking at the German media, talking to journalists here in Germany about the fact that I'm going to be discussing the Israeli election, it was interesting that a lot of people said to me, you know, look at the names in Israeli history. Look at Ben Gurion, look at Menachem Begin, Golda Meir, Shimon Peres, these giants. You know, I mean, people will always have divided views about these people. Why is Israel not capable of turning out another, I should have mentioned Yitzhak Rabin, of course, yeah? Why is Israel not capable of turning out at this juncture a leader of that magnitude?
Look, even giants start as dwarfs, and luckily we in Europe also don't have Churchill today.
We have Angela Merkel.
She's not Churchill. She's not Churchill, and even Churchill was thrown away by the British electorate in 1945.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really interesting question. The leaders that you mentioned, they were in the process of building a strong Israel. And they came up through the independence issue, through the war beforehand, through the independence issue, through the 1950s, through being isolated, through building, we didn't mention the nuclear bomb, through the relations with France. These were leaders who were totally focused on strengthening and building the Israeli state And also, in order to preserve that state, they were willing to go the long mile with the Egyptians. I mean, this was very, very important, extremely important. Now, the terrible problem, and I fear about this, and I've recently been back to Israel. The problem now with Israel is this building experiment over? And this experiment was always coupled with the security, the prosperity, and peace with the neighbours. And are these three planks now over? Is the society so exhausted and so let down? Or, as Rafael says, no, people still want peace? This is the unanswered question, the unfinished business in Israel.
One question. How does the Israeli say hello? Shalom.
Shalom, peace.
Peace. And I think it's a good sign. And the Arabs say salam.
Rafael is determined to get his peace message over, and I admire that. That's a great contribution. But the leadership conundrum.
I don't think we shouldn't be too nostalgic about the past. I mean, we clearly had huge figures in the past, but it reminds me of the German discussion, oh, we have Merkel, why don't we have the Helmut Schmidt or Willy Brandt type anymore? I'm very, very lucky we have Angela Merkel right now because we have different kind of politics and political problems to solve. I mean, we need a multilateral, not going it alone approach. We need some understanding. We need the ability to talk for hours and hours and hours and do it again and again, and not just, that's me and I will tell you how it goes.
But this is Rafael's point.
A new approach, a little bit like Angela Merkel's approach, I hear.
I don't know if Angela Merkel as an Israeli leader would solve the problem. I have my doubts about this as well, because I think it's just a very, very hard problem to solve.
She's a very big friend of it.
They're not alone.
Is Israel going to vote for a new government? Is this the end of Benjamin Netanyahu? Is Israel going to get a new leader?
I think we need some leaders together.
Yes or no, a new leader for Israel after this election?
Maybe yes.
I'll hedge my bets, yes.
I say no.
No. OK, that's your lot. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought in this discussion on the upcoming Israeli election. Thanks very much for joining us here on Quadriga, and till next week. Bye-bye. Tschüss.